Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing quite well, thank you, and ready and raring to go and solve all the problems. And I want to follow up on what we've talked about twice now, I think. Did a weekly report on it, and that is the trial of Assange.
Yeah.
Will this ever turn out to be the trial of the century?
Yeah.
It could, you know, because of the significance of it. And of course, we mentioned that there would be the beginning of the trial in London in order to find out if he has to be extradited. We have to bring our citizens. Oh, no, he's not a citizen.
Yeah.
We're not trying to bring our own citizen home for breaking the law. But anyway, it's a long story. He's been in prison for a long time. One time it looks like we even tried to release him. You know, in the old days, they'd let the cell open, and then they could shoot the guy in the back who was escaping.
Yeah.
Well, this was what they were talking about doing. And you may make a comment on that later, but we were really engaged in that. And I imagine there's some truth to it because it didn't happen, but they were mainly to do that to murder him. But they're just slowly murdering him now. You know, he's been in there and things haven't gotten better. I don't imagine that prison cell is any bit, not one bit better than being in an embassy, but it's miserable. His life has been ruined as it is, and they're still working on it. But yesterday, the trial, the hearing, they call it a hearing, extradition hearing, it went all day, and they gave the opening statement. Each side had a chance to explain, you know, why he shouldn't be extradited, and the other one said he's a monster, you know, and it's our government that's really running the show. If we had one statement, you know, and Trump did make the statement, I don't care about Assange. If he really should have stuck with that, and I'm not interested, and our government's not interested in it, and it's all blown out of proportion. I mean, this would be over and done with. But we've talked about whistleblowers, and I've made the comment, and I truly believe it, that when a whistleblower, somebody broadly speaking, gives us information that is really true, they're not rewarded. They're the ones who go to prison, you know, and our whistleblowers here at home, I mean, they get punished for telling the truth. And I think that's what's going on here. There's a lot of details to dissect, and they will do it, but it's probably already set. The one thing I've been impressed with so far on this is how broad the deep state has control. The various governments, the various courts, and people do what we say, and it seems that there's no official in the world hardly that's in office that would stand up for Assange. You would think there'd be at least one that would say he's been mistreated.
Yeah.
But maybe news will get better during the week, but right now I'm not getting too optimistic about that.
Well, there is one person who said that Assange is getting a bad treatment, but that person is Tulsi Gabbard, and they're not even letting her in the debate, so that's what happens.
You go.
Well, you mentioned his life is ruined, and that is true. His life has been ruined. 7 years stuck in a tiny room at the Ecuadorian embassy in London under terrible conditions, and then nabbed out in the early morning attack on him and put into a jail cell. But you know, I think this trial is proceeding. This is not a trial. We call it a trial, but it is a trial. Actually, it's a hearing, but it's a trial because it's proceeding on two levels. There's an actual trial of what the U.S. is claiming they need to have him extradited for. But I think there's a larger context, which is a propaganda, the propaganda of effect of what the U.S. is doing. And the message is clear. If you expose U.S. crimes, you will have your life ruined, you will be tarnished, you'll never be able to live, or certainly to live in society again. And that's really what the message is. And this is evident, I think, from James Lewis, who's representing the U.S. position on this in favor of extradition. There is a sort of a PR value to what he's saying. And this is the first thing. They need to prove that Assange did something that helped al-Qaeda and hurt the U.S. So the first thing he said that oh, we found documents from WikiLeaks with bin Laden. So therefore, this just shows that he was useful to the enemies of the United States. And I would just say two things about that. First of all, I don't believe them, because they said they found a lot of stuff there, but we never saw any evidence. In fact, we never even saw bin Laden because they put his ashes in the water, they supposedly said. The second of all, and this is what I would say, if finding WikiLeaks documents in possession of Al-Qaeda is so harmful to the U.S. that someone needs to go to jail for 175 years, what does it mean when you find a bunch of U.S. weapons in the hands of Al-Qaeda in Syria that the U.S. government itself facilitated? When is some U.S. government guy going to go to jail for 175 years for that?
Boy, shouting out truth like that, you could get into trouble. It's been said by many, and in some ways it's true, journalism is on trial. But our government wouldn't admit that, no, not journalism, because they say we are not going to prosecute him for publishing information. Yeah. But we're going to do it still under the Espionage Act, but for releasing names of individuals that may be involved. So that is still pretty painful. Yeah. And it's just a technicality, and this whole idea, the Espionage Act has been so rarely used that for us to decide that getting Assange back in here and giving him a life sentence is the most important thing that we have ever done in the last 100 and some years in using the Espionage Act. So I think that this name thing is the thrust of it, and of course his defense is going to have to come up with the answers on how can they modify that and how much of that. But they have already said that the release of these names has done a great deal of harm, and that people disappeared or something like that. But if once again, it's sort of like the charges made when Trump was on the other side of what they were doing. They were charging, but they never had any evidence of what the charges were, and they don't have evidence of this. But it's something that's going to be fully discussed. Mainly, it'll be one side. I think they're very sincere about trying to get to the truth of all this thing, and the other side is just propaganda in order to win a political fight, in order to say, don't mess with us when it's the state that's involved and it's information that the people don't deserve. You can be in big trouble. And of course, we've known that, for a lot of centuries probably. You can't tell the people that the government's abusing you, even though most of the people know it anyway. But if you have the evidence, that's when you're in trouble. You have to suffer if you have the evidence and you are telling the truth, and it reflects badly on our own policy, which is no fun. How do you do this? Some people say, well, you're not a patriot. Yeah. We're not a patriotic station. But the way I look at it, patriotism is something where you are willing to criticize your government if your government is indeed wrong, or at least call it to your attention to look at it. And right now, we're being challenged because they would say that we're undermining our own government. But then you go, in contrast to that, you go and you take a poll of the American people, and you say, how many of you believe your government? And that they tell the truth, and they explain it when people are assassinated and when wars are starting. Nobody believes it. Yeah. And yet they must be drawn into the immediate thing they heard for the last 5 minutes on CNN and say, there, CNN said it, and there's a bunch of people, I guess, still follow it. So the job of sorting it out and presenting truth is no easy task.
It's no easy task, that's for sure. Well, the issue of the specifics of the U.S. argument, and this is again James Lewis, this is what you say, and it's sort of, I think, that's sort of putting up a straw man, although they accuse Assange's lawyers of doing the same thing. But Lewis says the U.S., we're not criminalizing the publication of classified materials. What we're criminalizing is the publications of names of informants or dissidents who help the U.S. and allies in military operations, end quote, is what he's claiming. And this sets them up to say, hey, so you want people who help us to get hurt and get killed? What's wrong with you? And that's what they're setting up. Of course, the Assange side argued that they did try to warn the State Department before the publication, before these things were released, and the State Department put them off. And they also claim that the Guardian newspaper published passwords that led to the release, and they shouldn't have done that. So there is, we don't get too far into the weeds in this, but this is the sort of, but I think if you step back a little bit, the reality is that Lewis, even yesterday, was not able to tell us anywhere that there was any harm to anyone. There were claims that some people disappeared due to this, but we don't have any names or the circumstances. A lot of things happen to people who collaborate with the U.S. government when the U.S. government is invading their country, right? It just happens. Right. And the other thing is that the Manning trial in 2013 was the same thing. They wanted to prove that specific people were hurt by what he did, and they failed to do that. So I think that's a critical issue.
Right. You know, another aspect of this trial, and it did come up in the opening, how Dana Rohrabacher may be involved. And there's two sides of that issue. I don't know what the truth is. I'm curious about it because both you and I know Dana pretty well, and I've worked with him on certain things. Some days he was really dying the line, but the story at least is said that he went over there, talked to Assange, and offered him a pardon if he would provide information that the Russians did not give Wikileaks some information.
Yeah.
So that raises more questions than answers for me, but that's what that is going to be discussed, and I don't know how significant that would be, but offering the pardon is obviously stepping over the bounds of the justice system working smoothly and properly, especially under circumstances of some foreigner, an Australian, being locked up in an Ecuadorian embassy and following our directions, and we're offering the pardon. It's a bit weird. So just out of curiosity, I'd like to see what comes of that.
Yeah, that story is very, very interesting. We wonder what did Rohrabacher have in his hand, or what was he told by Trump or the administration? Because if it's true, as it's being told by Assange's lawyers, that's clearly a quid pro quo. There's no question about it. Hey, if you prove that the Russians didn't give all that DNC info to WikiLeaks and embarrass Hillary, then you'll get a preemptive pardon and you'll go free. If that's the case, it's not only a quid pro quo, I would call it extortion, because look what's happened, the fact that he did not do it. You could also say that Chelsea Manning is facing extortion because she's been put in jail ever since she refused to testify against WikiLeaks. She's fined $1,000 every day, and she's been in jail for months and months now because of this.
You know, the big picture is that I can't imagine much of this occurring if we had been following a non-interventionist foreign policy for the last 20 or 30 years. There wouldn't be much incentive or intrigue about all this, and we wouldn't be as engaged. But we'd also have to deal with, though, the fact that in reality, we don't have a sovereign government that reflects the people. Here, it's a government that is controlled, by a deep state, and we keep trying to figure out the flip-flops that happens with this administration. Of course, in the campaign, it was one thing. WikiLeaks were they were the greatest people in the world. Now we want to put Assange in prison. In America, he's not allowed to go back home. He has to be put in prison, and they think 175 years is adequate because he did such horrible things. But I think that the deep state is still very much in charge, and personalities are involved and all kinds of things. But the flip-flopping is nothing that I've ever admired.
Yeah, that's true. And you started out talking about this thing that we saw in the Daily Mail. We might even put up the headline because it's pretty wild. And I think the Daily Mail did this to make Assange's lawyers look like they're a little bit loopy. They were plotting to kill him and make it look like an accident, But let's look at the treatment of Assange when he was in the embassy. We know that the CIA or some U.S. government entity hired a Spanish company to spy on him and his attorneys. And it's also not shocking when you think about what U.S. officials actually said about Assange. And this is via Daniel Lazare in antiwar.com, just a couple of quotes, and there are a lot of them. Comey told Trump, "We need his head on a pike." Joe Biden, "He's a high-tech terrorist." Hillary, "Committed an attack on the international community." The New Yorker, a super secretive, thin-skinned, megalomaniacal leader. Dianne Feinstein, an agitator intent on damaging the government. In addition to that, Peter King wanted Wikileaks designated a terrorist. Remember what Pompeo said? They're a hostile intelligence organization. So this is the view of Washington about Assange. Is it so shocking that they might try to off him, if that's the case?
Does that mean bipartisanship is working well again?
As you always say, exactly.
They are getting together. But I just wonder if there are any national polls, there probably are, about where the American people stand. I would think most of it is in ignorance. They don't know too much about it. It's not on the evening television, so they don't think about it. But I think that, if we go by our correspondence with the people who like what we're doing, they have a great deal of sympathy for justice and not putting an individual like Assange in prison. So this is something that it'd be interesting to see what happens on this. But it's something that is really serious business about what's going to happen.
It is, and it's terrible. And we had Julian Assange on this show a few years ago, and we also had him speak at our conference. So we have a personal feeling about this, and you've always been in favor of openness. But the reason why we have show trial for a number of reasons, but here's another reason, Dr. Paul. They want to bring him and drag him over to this court in Alexandria. And this is, they call it the spy court. No one has ever defeated. No one has ever been found innocent in this court. It is the biggest kangaroo court. It's the show trial court because the jury pool is all drawn from people in the intelligence community who have a stake in this. So if he's there, it's all over. So it's a very serious thing. The U.S. attorney representing the U.S. said, "Oh, it's hyperbole that he faces 175 years." Right. I don't believe that for 1 second. But Dr. Paul, I just want to close with an update on our conference. As you know, it's May 23rd, and I'll put the link in the description of the show on where you can get more information. Got good news, Dr. Paul. Actually, we've got some speakers confirmed, and we'll talk about that in a couple of days. But in our first, I think toward the end of the last week, we put the tickets up. We've already sold a quarter of all the tickets available, so they're going very fast. We have some folks who are going to be on the host committee helping us with the conference, and you can get in touch with me if you're interested in that. But ronpaulinstitute.org/conference. Get some more information. The War on Free Speech, Houston, May 23rd. It's going to be a great event, Dr. Paul.
Very good. And I want to just mention about the trial that we've been talking about. If it ends up in Virginia, it's all over. Like you said, nobody ever beat the insiders. But in ordinary law, if a crime has been committed in one area and there's been such bad publicity, then they have a right to ask for a change in venue, and frequently they get it, they move it. But that doesn't always happen. I thought, well, wouldn't this be something? Change of venue. If it's an unfair jurisdiction in Virginia, why isn't there a vehicle? Maybe the Constitution would defend that request because it's such a biased court. But not likely to happen. But the change in venue ought to be somewhere outside the United States. The United States ought to be out of this. Why don't they talk to the Australians? If he's a citizen of Australia and he's supposedly committed a crime, but no, it's a venue that is can't be changed. It'll probably end up, if there is one, if they do bring him to the United States, he'll be tried in Virginia, and of course that will be very bad. Now, the one thing that we did notice this week, significant number of people were rallying around in London where this trial is. I don't know the number of people who actually get in to watch it, but they were keeping close tabs, and fortunately they can give us some information. Because you know what? Now that we know that both the current administration and the Democrats, all the Democrats hate the guy, and he's the enemy of liberty. Well, he happens to be the defender of freedom of speech in the First Amendment, but nobody would acknowledge that. But let's hope that something breaks in our direction. Every once in a while that happens. Right now the odds are against him, but I think the only thing that can save Assange is that we not have 200 or 300 people complaining in London. We need hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating against this injustice, not even pretending everything. Everybody knows every ounce of truth about it. But just get them into a venue where you can get to the bottom of it and get to the truth. That's what we're supposed to be looking for. So it's a shame. It's probably not going to be a good week, but I'm hoping I'm wrong on that and that something good will come of it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.